Good evening.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome to the Financial Monitoring Task Group. I hope everybody had a relaxing and refreshing holiday and are ready to rejoin the fray of council business, casework and Brexit. Welcome to Merton.TV also. We have our papers are mostly green in colour this evening. This is of course because these papers haven't gone to Cabinet yet, so they remain exempt and can't be published. So what I suggest we do is we take point 6 on the agenda up one item, leaving the exempt papers to the end. And after we've done the first 5 items, we'll ask Merton.TV to leave and we'll do the Q1 report. So, I guess we move on to the first item, apologies for absence, and I think we have to record Councillor Gratton with apologies for lateness, possibly apologies for absence. Item 2, any pecuniary interest to declare? No, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. First of all, matters of factual accuracy, please. Any errors or omissions in the minutes?
Sure.
Peter.
Just what under the second page, environmental regeneration, the first paragraph refers to one-off savings of 1.1.
Yeah, £1,100. That doesn't seem very much, does it? No.
That's not too big.
Sorry, I shall change that.
Further on in the alphabet.
Anything else? I think on the page 3, middle paragraph, it's a house and property company.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And I'll take it the minutes are approved. Thank you. So, matters arising from the minutes. On page 3, we have action on the Director of Corporate Services. And of course, that item is included for our agenda for February meeting. So that action is discharged. Thank you, Caroline. Turning over to page 4, the work programme is, as we'll discuss later on, so that's dealt with. I think there are no other matters arising. So we move on to item 4, the Customer Contact Programme Lessons Learnt report. Caroline, are you introducing this?
I think I need to hand over to Sophie.
Okay. Good. Welcome, Sophie. This is your chance.
Thank you. Good evening. So you've asked to receive a copy of the Lessons Learned report for the programme, which I presented to you this evening. The report in front of you has been considered by the Customer Contact Programme Board and also the Council's Merton Improvement Board, which oversees all large-scale projects in the Council and is responsible for ensuring that lessons taken from those are disseminated. And I think it's worth noting that both of those boards were mindful of the complexity and challenges that are associated with projects of this scale, particularly where technology is involved, and that some of those risks are difficult to eliminate entirely, and so our learning needs to be focused on how you plan for and mitigate against those, given the experience that we've had of this programme. So I think it's worth sharing that comment with you. So turning to the report itself, it sets out what was actually delivered, which in summary is a new website with automated transactions, and technology within the contact centre to enable us to deal with inquiries at the first point of contact and ensure they were transferred immediately over to supplier systems without any human interaction in those, any manual interface with those, so they were swifter and we could keep track on resolutions and report on performance. I guess moving to the lessons, if I just pull out a few, I'm sure you'll have questions, so I won't kind of go through too much detail, but I'll respond to any questions you may have. But I think some of the key lessons were around the contract itself. We found to be very well structured and very comprehensive, and it was well used, particularly where there were concerns about the level of provision being received. And the fact that there were staged payments within it meant that we only had to pay for what we received, so that was a good way to manage a provider. It was a positive that council staff were involved within the programme, that made sure that there was an in-depth knowledge introduced to the programme around the council's processes and procedures, but also that there was some knowledge transfer and upskilling of council staff around the new processes and technology that was put in place. The review, which was undertaken by our Programme Management Office, came to the view that there was a disciplined approach to project management throughout the project, and that was valuable when holding the provider to account. Some of the things that we might do differently, moving on to section 4, we reflected, or the review reflected on the procurement route. There was a decision to take the procurement route we did, but there are a number of different procurement routes available in any given circumstance. In this case, there were a number of elements put together in a single contract, and the procurement route that was chosen was competitive dialogue. And I think the reflection on that is just to be sure on each, as we go into each procurement, that we are making the right balance between having a commercial interest, so chunking up a large number of elements of delivery for a single provider is cheaper, but it might carry more risk, and actually there's a balance to be struck between using numerous providers and spreading the risk versus the price involved with using different providers. So I think there's just to be conscious of that all the time and what decision we need to make in terms of how we balance value for money and risk. I think there is a kind of reflection that we need to think much more about modular development, making sure we chunk delivery up into smaller pieces, not only to spread the risk with different providers, but just to make sure that we are keeping pace with technology. Technology changed over the life of the programme, and having such a large-scale specification of requirements over a long period of time meant that actually it might have been better to have small development as we went in a more agile approach. There was one reflection. The contract was developed with outcomes rather than outputs, and that was designed very specifically to make sure that the provider could bring their own expertise in the marketplace and not be restricted by a very singular view of officers of how the solution should be constructed. But what that meant is it probably would have been useful to have had a mobilisation period before we actually began work, where we translated those outcomes with the provider into much more detailed outputs and could work under the detail of what exactly was to be provided, because outcomes, whilst they allow that room for manoeuvre, they also allow room for perhaps disagreement over what the detail should look like. So I think that was one of the lessons that we took from the programme. I think the other thing is when a programme goes wrong, what it is, or when you don't get what you expect from a provider, what do you do? And our reflection on that is that actually there were capacity implications of that for staff time and where that was focused. Were they focusing on the kind of using the contract to hold the supplier to account, or actually focusing on delivering the outcomes, and whether you can maintain the same level of focus on each with the capacity of the programme. So I think there's a reflection for us about, as an organisation, about what you do when you get to that position with a provider and how you make sure you maintain the focus and how you use your capacity maybe in different ways. And perhaps even introduce some of your own capacity in order to keep delivery moving in tandem with some difficult conversations with a provider. I think we reflected that whilst there was change management and engagement through the programme. You can never have too much. So the project team would say that they engaged all staff repeatedly, and yet staff would say that they felt there was room for more. So our reflection on that is wherever there's a change programme, however much change management you think you need, add a bit more, because you really do need to make sure people are taken through that change process. And also, I think the point about how reliant you are on a provider comes back to the point of risk versus cost. So how much risk you absorb as an organisation when you're working with a provider, and how much you want to have internal capacity to double check some of their advice is a question about where you place your risk and how much you're prepared to invest on managing that risk. I think the other point was about delivery and the style of delivery, and thinking about agile project delivery. In this case, we were expecting an agile methodology to be used by a provider, but that didn't materialise. But I think even beyond that, there's a question about how the organisation is more agile, and I think it goes back to my point about chunking up elements of delivery. So perhaps thinking in a more time-boxed way through a period of time about what you want to deliver, and then stopping and reflecting on that before you then commission the next piece of work. So there's some discussion taking place at the project board and Merton Improvement Board about how our contracts might allow for some of those gateways in future, so that you can even have your contract structured in a more agile way. There's something in there about business processes. There was an intention in the project to simplify business processes, and that was achieved to a large degree, but there was some difficulty for some staff in adapting their processes to a more streamlined approach. So there's some examples around that. For example, where you want to automate something online, if they've got very complex business rules around that, it can be very difficult to automate and not work as well as you expect. So that's been taken into our next strategy already, where we're making sure that we're clear that simplifying business processes is a given, and they have to be more amenable to online before you even start the process of automating them. So I think the organisation's already started to pick that point up. And then I suppose the last point I'd make is around staff retention. So one of the key difficulties the provider had, which I know they brought to the Commission, when they came to the Commission, they shared with the Commission at the time, was retaining and recruiting staff, which is a familiar problem for us as a council. And whilst the contract allowed for that, and we specified that we would have the same staff throughout the life of the contract, in reality that can't be it can't be guaranteed. They cannot guarantee they have the same staff. And whilst the contract provided for us to hold them to account for that, there's a practicality to that. And so I think our reflection was, let's be more realistic about the likelihood that there will be staff changes or staff difficulties on the part of providers, but plan for how you would mitigate that and deal with that as it arises, rather than pretend you can prevent it happening at all. So I hope I've given you a bit of a summary of the report, and I'm sure you'll have questions on the detail that will delve into the areas you're most interested in.
Thank you very much, Sophie, an excellent introduction. Colleagues,
Thank you. So, declaration. This was why public sector IT projects fail, was my master's thing, right? I did that in 2010. Okay, so the tragedy in what is a good document and an honest document is that much of the lessons that you've written here replicate the stuff I was reading and writing about in 2010, right? And that concerns me, because that could, from the outset, that's telling people that they're not learning from other people's experiences and other people's identified. These are not niche, these are, although the topic is quite niche, they're NAO covered extensively by NAO reports into these areas. To ask one question before I could give 5 examples, I suppose. Who was the project manager for all of this?
We had, over the lifetime, 2 project managers. One was a member of staff. We found it difficult to recruit to the post. We did recruit a member of staff who was there up to halfway through the procurement, but then left. And after that, we were unable to recruit, so we had a contractor who was providing that resource to us up until about 2/3 through the way of the programme. And beyond that point, as we moved into more kind of negotiation and dialogue with the provider, it fell to internal staff to lead on that, because what we were trying to do is manage cost at that time.
And I understand that, but this is probably one of those areas where true saving is costing more, right? It's because IT procurement and the qualifications held by specialists who procure IT programs would have prevented some of these mistakes being made. So to give you 5 kind of obvious ones that have stuck out for me, is that at the beginning we said we've looked at, you've quite rightly taken on employees boards, right? But what's absent? So you have 5 Ps essentially in this space, which are the politicians, the policymakers, the practitioners, the providers and the public, right? The practitioners are the council reps, the politicians are self-explanatory, the policymakers are the people sitting around. And they've all, in this case, 4 of those groups have had great stake. But one, the public interface, right, is not represented, right? And when you look at IT projects and why IT projects fail, and I'm not on about fail in terms of time, scope and quality, it's because they're not sufficiently consulted at the outset, or certainly not from this report, right? And that's one of the problems we face. And I'll go through them and rather in point. The second is when we're talking about commercial off the shelf, right? One of the problems in public sector generally is that we think that we need to create bespoke suites and services, and to a certain degree we do have legislation that does, right? But the entire sector is driven by the technology that is used within the commercial lending, particularly CRM, right? So traditionally we and I'll touch on this again later, we adjust processes to competently. You've spoken to that, how processes are difficult to adjust. But with regard to the commercial off the shelf, there's also, I find it difficult to think that only 3 or 4 years ago that we were actually the leader in our digitisation process, that no other council had done any of this, right? Did we mimic other councils? Could we not just take theirs? Can we not just learn from best practice? I'm happy if you say I'm totally wrong, but I find it unusual that we would be at the cutting edge of this, when there are 343 councils or whatever, that we were the first to deal with our legislation. The third, modular architecture. People have been talking about agile and modular architecture for 2-3 decades. You know what I mean? The notion that this is a lesson identified for us, that we should have done this, is peculiar to say it best. You know what I mean? It is accepted practice that when you're doing large-scale IT projects, we should be doing it in a modular way because it stops these mistakes happening. The fourth is when you talk about the contract. You started off by saying it was a good contract, but the problem is if the contract doesn't allow you to enforce an agile architecture system, an agile adaptation and project development, it's not a good contract. The contract has to allow you to enforce with the contractor that those things are being done. And if it's not being done, because you may have used a contract writer, legal advice who's not versed in IT projects, it's going to cost you, because just like you wouldn't go to a solicitor, your average solicitor, to do a corporate deal because corporate law is a speciality, so is when it comes to IT procurement. And the final thing is to do with this the general overlapping sort of Venn diagram, that is platforms, processes, and people. The fact that this was a huge change program seems to have caught us by surprise in some degree. Whenever you change the platforms, i.e. the technology, the processes and the people have to adjust, right? And failing to actually condition that from the outset, and this goes to bringing the people in, and I'm glad you brought the workers in, but looking at those processes, again, that's a lesson that's been done, that has been explored. That's literature, and that's a model that's 30 years old. You know what I mean? This isn't, so whilst we talk about in one of the paragraphs, and all of these points are points you've effectively brought up yourself, but my concern is that we knew this beforehand. You know what I mean? We might not have, but this was known. All this stuff are regular mistakes and were throughout the noughties when IT procurement was a massive billion pound wastage programme. And I find it, I'm slightly concerned that we didn't, one, invest, and I'm again happy to say you said wrong, one, we didn't learn from those by actually bringing in an expert and investing in expertise and finding that expertise and trying to cut corners, and by cutting corners there, it's cost us in the long run. And that goes with both project management and with the contracting and writing the contracting. And I think if there's if there's a lesson of history, there's the lessons of history are never learned, you know what I mean? And it seems that we've made exactly the same mistake again. We should not be going into these things thinking that we're doing this for the first time. We should be investing in understanding these things and seeing what the 343, seeing what the other public sector IT projects and why they've gone on for the last 20, 30 years. Because I think if we had done, many of these things could have been avoided.
Of course, yeah.
So just to come back on a couple of the points and give you some, because I suppose there have been so many reports to review and scrutiny period, we didn't want to kind of cover too much ground. Just on the point about the public not represented, there was a large-scale piece of research that was done that involved users before the project was initiated, called the Customer Insight Project, and we had experts in to do that. And we also used customer personas in designing the website and then designing each element of functionality. And whilst we didn't have people sitting in the room designing functionality, we used those because actually that was the kind of best practice we were given from the external provider who was an expert in developing those functions. I still think there's room to do more, but there was public representative, and in the testing we tried to use people, particularly within Merton, who were residents of the borough and could use it in a way as a service user. So just to kind of reassure you, there was some focus on that. I think we were a little bit on the cutting edge, and I think that's probably one of the things that we would reflect on. So yes, every local authority was in the arena of putting things online, but we wanted something different. So what we didn't want, and we were very specific about this, was we didn't want different passwords, different usernames for every different element or portal that could exist. So I remember at the time in the kind of procurement presentation we did with about 70 providers who came along to see if they wanted to bid, sort of talking through my experience in the council I was living in at the time, of having one password for my kind of garden waste, another password for my planning application, another password for the tree I just reported, and another one for my council tax. And actually our expectation was that our residents should expect better than that, because that wasn't their experience of being a customer elsewhere. And therefore we were in a slightly different position to other authorities, and what we were looking to do was take what they'd done but build a step up from it. And I think that was a worthy ambition, but I think it was very, very difficult, and the provider thought it would be easier to achieve than it actually was in practice. But it was slightly at the cutting edge, and I think we really need to think about that and why actually the focus on modular development is even more important in that environment where you are testing new ways of doing things. So we did talk to other authorities, we visited a number of authorities and looked at what they've done, but I think we wanted something slightly better than that, and so our specification tried to take that one step further.
I think just on that as well, so clearly some of the history here, and I'm sure Peter will remember, was various call-ins about what we were looking to do. So originally we went to do something that was very similar to what other boroughs were doing, which was called CRM Lite. Members didn't like our lack of ambition, and therefore we went for something different, and went for something which was therefore much more outcome focused, because they were then able to work with us as to here's our ambition of what we want to achieve. You're the expert, you help us achieve it. So that's what we switched it to. And therefore bringing in and having it together, we didn't want, and we've had experience already of trying to do something and developers and providers blaming each other. And that's why we combined it to then say one organisation, one contractor was responsible for delivering everything, because it was then they're dealing with us and we were going to get caught picking them in between, oh no, if only the software linked with that, what's in the interfaces is their responsibility, not ours. So it's trying to
But
build on
using a
those.
single contract or invest, yeah, okay. I see why you've chosen that, but the money possibly would be better invested in a project manager rather than a single contractor. And that's quite, because a contractor doesn't hold itself to account from a knowing point in a way that project manager can hold. It gives you a champion, and a project manager who's separate from the contractor.
We did.
Yeah, so I was just going to come to that
Sorry,
point. Yeah, so we did, and as I say, that was up until about quite late, 2/3, 3/4 of the way into the programme. What we used a specialist contract lawyer from it externally to draft the contract. So we did. I think that is one of the reasons it was a fairly good contract. And we also had an experienced contractor who'd done this in other authorities in London as well, who was managing the contract on our behalf. So I suppose I just want to give you some reassurance that it wasn't a kind of naive kind of saunter into a problem. But I think, I mean, this probably should be taken in conjunction with the closed report that came to Scrutiny, where there were kind of some really significant challenges around the project, and I think there is something about you hear it, but you think it's not going to happen to you. So not to dismiss that there are lessons, and that doesn't mean to say now we know them. You know that's okay. So we do need to focus on that. But I think we did go for something ambitious, and we did use external expertise, but we still encountered difficulties. And what we need to do is say, well then what do you do when they arise? They say, don't they? Whatever's happened in the past, it's your next step that matters. And so actually, when you do find yourself in that position with a provider, how do you manage that going forward? And I think your point earlier about, sometimes you can save money in one area, but actually you spend it elsewhere. Is one of the reflections we've got on is when you're in that difficult position, how do you spend your money in the wisest way to get the programme through to delivery? We found that the contract, you can enforce it, but it's very costly. So to go to court on a contract is incredibly costly, and our advice was that actually there were...
You brought it up last time.
Yeah, it's very costly.
I remember you bringing it
very
up, but
costly
the last
going
time
to
you gave
court.
evidence.
So actually we could have enforced the contract at a number of points, but we had to look at what the cost of that was and whether there were other ways we should try and extract from the relationship we had the best value for the council. And I think we have reflected in more detail on the programme board and at MIB about how we take those lessons into other contractual relationships with providers and give ourselves time at each point, at each gateway, to make the decision consciously about how that capacity of the council is being spent, and when you kind of move into the space where actually legal challenge is the only way to go.
And just on something else that you mentioned, we actually, as part of this contract, created a culture and comms person as well, because this is going to be quite an impact on staff, and that's an area I think where there's still much more work to do. In another area where we've changed a system, in some ways we haven't had a lot of investment in new systems for quite a number of years. So bringing something in, I think people struggled with what we were trying to do. And another area where we brought a new system in, they'd had it for years, and therefore they don't like the new system because it doesn't do what the old system did in the way that they did it. The fact that technology's moved on, the systems have moved on, the processes...
And they need to move on. Yeah.
So, not literally.
Move forward.
Yes, and that's part of something, the wider lesson that we still are looking at, is how do we bring staff with us when we're introducing change of this scale. And that's something that we're still looking at doing to make sure that it touches everyone and people understand the part they have to play in it as well, to help change as well as be changed.
So listen to what you're saying about specifically you did bring in you did outsource expertise, for want of a better description, and hold it back on through life or through development, continual sort of public consultation, which you did some and not enough. But just looking at this expertise stuff, and you brought in the expertise and it still went awry, okay? And the contract, and as we're seeing in other areas, in sort of the council and across public sector, you know, contracts, all well and good, but if they're unenforceable because of their cost prohibitive, right, that in itself is a kind of key lesson, right? It doesn't really, because it doesn't really matter what your contract is if you can't monitor and enforce it, right? And that's certainly something that we're seeing in other areas. And you know what I mean, that's a continual lesson. But going away from that for the moment, and just to ask about, do you think that the single issue with this, or the two issues that affected it most then are the lack of doing a modular approach and members being overly ambitious? And that's my, you know, a massive question.
I think the modular approach would have helped us manage the risk much better. So I do think that's really important. How you spread the risk, I think that's really important. I don't think we shouldn't be ambitious. I think we should be ambitious because you know, Merton wants to be the best council, and Merton's staff are characterised by their desire for delivering the best services they can to residents. But I think then in those circumstances it becomes even more important that you understand the risks and manage that and mitigate it through chunking it up, thinking about, so your point about the contract, we had quite a lengthy discussion at the programme board about, well then we're going to talk to procurement and think about, could you actually construct a contract, even for a large scale programme, that had break clauses more frequently within it, that allow you then, as part of an agile approach, to dip out without having to go through some big, you know, enforcement exercise. Now there will be a cost to that, because providers will give you the best price if they've got a nice big chunk of work coming their way for a long period of time, and then that will also have effects on who they recruit and how long they secure staff for. So there's a kind of balance to be struck.
But you are selling your risk.
But actually what you're doing is you're just kind of managing your risk between one and the other, and I think you just need to do that really consciously in this circumstance, and we can use this as a basis to remind ourselves through the kind of organisational memory that we're creating, to make sure that we are consciously making decisions about those risks.
Before Caroline speaks, I know, because the question will relate to you as much as is listening to that, right? And this idea we were talking about innovation in a meeting no longer, right? And I think the aspiration to be excellent is a good one, right? But there's certain areas where we're clearly better placed to aspire towards excellence than others. You know, there's areas where we hold knowledge and we hold expertise, and IT procurement is not one of them, so we can't mark our own homework, you know what I mean? So it seems like an odd area to take risk and you know, aim for the moon, quite frankly. Now, when you take a portfolio approach to risk, and we've talked about risk extensively, and you do take it on, that's exactly what you do. You take an enterprise-wide approach. You will take risk in certain areas, but hold firm in others, right? And it seems odd that we've chosen this one to be a notoriously risky thing for the public sector to do, right? To strive for. And you know, if it's the members pushing it because they want the shiniest thing, reports would very well say that, right? Quite frankly, because if the members are at fault, and there's an entire phenomenon in the 90s and the noughties, which was called the in-flight magazine phenomenon, right? Which was where chief execs and politicians would read in the back of a mag and they'd say, we want that shiny thing, we want the best thing. I want my company to have the best IT project, I want my... And if that's been partly responsible for what we're doing here, we need to own it, right? You know what I mean? It's all well and good us turning around and saying, because when I talk about that 5P stakeholder model, the undue influence of different people, the politicians, right? The undue influence of politicians as opposed to practitioners and the public is an important aspect of that, because of that in-flight magazine phenomenon. And that's what something here reminds me of. So that's my first comment in response to what you're saying. The second is with regards to this contracts, and hence I'm sort of putting across, is this, we have got a huge problem across the sector, and not just in this council, with monitoring and enforcing contracts, right? We hope that when something is written in black and white, that it will become enforceable, but it doesn't become enforceable because we don't have the resources to monitor it, and then we don't have the capacity of the resources to enforce it, to take people to court, for the reasons you've done, and that's not unique to this place. Now, of course there is a cost incurred by doing a modular contract in any or time specific with more break clauses to move out of the modularity of IT, but just more break clauses within other contracts, be it street cleaning, be it, be it parks and green spaces, or whatever it might be. But given the size of the risk we're taking and our inability to monitor and enforce, shouldn't that be our default practice? Right, is break clauses, and we're buying out the risk by paying a little bit more, rather than going for the lengthier contracts, relying on monitoring and enforcement, which we know is almost unachievable because of limited capacity, increasingly limited capacity within councils across the sector, increasingly difficult, sort of high costs in taking people to court. Is that a lesson that is actually transferable, not just from IT procurement, but to general contracting? So the first is a statement for you, the second I suppose for you, Pam.
After you've answered those
Sorry.
comments about I'll invite Peter to ask the question. Sophie.
Well, I suppose the key one to respond to is the latter, isn't it? About the kind of procurement. And
The key one to respond to is about the councillors misbehaving.
Wow.
Really. I know you're in a difficult position, but I'm really interested to know, because we've got to be held to account sometimes for overly influencing things in directions for the wrong reasons. And I'm interested to know whether or not you think it was pushed, and it was pushed too much by us as politicians pushing for this, as opposed to the practitioners and stuff.
no, so it probably predates me mostly.
But get out.
No, when I arrived, there was already an agreement to go ahead with the system, which was the light system, and then there was some anxieties expressed around that and whether it would deliver the kind of ambition. And so we went back and developed a strategy, which was signed off, and then went through to procurement. But I think it was quite a contested program and project in terms of how it's delivered on a scale of ambition across different members that were part of the scrutiny and approval process. So I think it was, I think there was a degree of dialogue and discussion about how ambitious we were being, and whether we really were sufficiently looking to get the best delivery for the money that we put aside. And I suppose my other reflection would be, I'm not sure how comfortable those audiences would have been with increasing costs around making that possible either. There was some kind of anxiety about the level of expenditure too. So I think the dialogue at that time was quite contested and quite tricky in terms of managing ambition within the cost and making sure that we were delivering the value for that. But the debate prior to that did precede me.
So I would say, because this is a contract for, it's different to buying an adult or children's social care system, where it has to perform a particular function and you have to have certain things done according to keep children safe or keep adults safe and things like that. So I think pushing the ambition in this way, I don't think was pushing it too far. And I think it was useful because it just helped bring us to a certain stage where I think we'd been, as I said, we hadn't invested in IT for quite a while. So it was then seeing where do we want to be, where is our place, and as a result of that we have also done our new financial system, our social care system, we've done our M3, so major environment system as well. So on the back of this was then setting out our story of where we needed to be as an organisation, and also where our customers and residents wanted us to be. Because their expectations are rising up always around how they expected to work with us, and therefore that was our way of trying to meet some of their ambitions. We clearly haven't met all of their ambitions and expectations, but that's something that we have been working towards. So I don't think it was too much to be able, with what we then changed it to. How this then sits along with the other procurements, I think an IT project is different to a service product procurement. So therefore some of the things, and some of this would have been discussed previously, but when you say we weren't able to monitor and enforce, I think when you look at what would have been said previously, in some ways we did very well with this contract.
I remember you talking about...
To the extent that some of our other ones haven't. So when you bear that in mind, and also what was actually delivered still with what the outcome was with...
The general point though, with regards to breakpoints, modularity in your sense, and breakpoints in a wider sense, because that's all more modularity.
But we do have break clauses in most of our major contracts.
And do you think they are sufficient? As in, are they well placed, or do they give us enough opt-out and flexibility, given how limited, the very specific question really that I'm asking, do we have enough break clauses, given our limited capability to monitor and enforce?
Balanced by the investment, as Sophie said, that a contractor needs to put in to be able to make sure that they're not priced out of our reach. So there will be break clauses. So waste contract has break clause, I think, after 8 years, because the initial investment needed for the vehicles and that.
Yeah,
so that's why that's done. Our HR payroll system had a break clause. I'm trying to think, after 7 years. So again, just so the upfront cost of providers putting systems in, that is taken into account as the best time to then think about it. I don't recall if our Conway contract, that's just in the process of being finalised, has a break clause. But that's one that's been in place for a number of years with the type of contract that we have. So certainly we do look at break clauses, and certainly with some of the things that we're doing now, it's then what does that mean? How can we trigger it? And also for the provider, do we trigger it? Or can the provider then say, I'm walking away now, thanks very much, don't want to do this anymore? That's the other risk that we need to bear in mind with some of the services we're providing and the lack of a market out there at times as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and then Paul, and then Natasha, and then Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Caroline reminds me, I think it's 12, 13 years that we've been looking at this, and it is, I think, originally the case that CRM Lite and was seen as a fairly techie solution. I think it's to Sophie's credit that when she came on board, she did step right back from that and said we need to do a great deal more consulting with users and find out what they actually need rather than imposing on them. I think the concept was simple enough that we wanted our residents, our council taxpayers, to have one account number, as it were, if you like, and through that to be able to access all of the various services that we might provide to them. And if anybody's been involved in databases will know that concept is very alluring, very attractive, but quite difficult to deliver in practice. But I think that's what, once it was put to us, we saw that was really surely the way we had to go. I would say I think there was as much enthusiasm for that amongst officers as amongst members, actually, that it was agreed that we wanted to make the effort for something that would deliver that, so that through one point of contact, residents would be, one key in, if you like, residents would be able to pick up all of the services they might require. I think Forgive me if I've asked this question previously, but it's really about...
I'm not forgiving you.
There we are.
You clearly have.
Not allowed to answer.
Time's up.
There we are. It's due diligence. Is there any way we could have triangulated our approach to GDIT to spot any warning signs between what they're telling us on the one hand and what they're actually capable of delivering on the other? And linked to that is the competitive dialogue process, and I think you're saying in effect that maybe we need to be a little bit more guarded when we go into that, because it's all very well saying, well, tell us what you can deliver, but maybe we need to have some hard edges to that and say, these are certainly things we absolutely must have. So.
Yes, so we did take up references and visit reference sites that the provider had used before, and we looked into their financial accounts, and we looked at the scale of their provision, which was within the sector but also across NHS and also the Ministry of Defence. And so they gave us quite a lot of comfort that actually we were with a significant partner who was going to deliver, who was in a strong place. I think what we couldn't have known was that within about a year of going into the contract, I think it would appear that they took a decision to withdraw from local government arena. But at the time we contracted with them, this was to be their flagship site, maybe 18 months in, a year to 18 months, and what we saw was a great deal of intervention from the parent company at that time. So I don't know how we could see that, but I do think the report quite rightly points out that you can get into a kind of groupthink place of optimism bias where you're so excited by what they promise they can deliver for the money that actually you think, well, this is fantastic, and you kind of join, and there's an energy. There was an energy at the start of the contract that was really exciting, and I think there's a good a reminder in this report to make sure that everybody pulls back from that and is perhaps a little bit more guarded, cynical. Just takes a slight. You want that energy at the start of a contract, but you also need a bit of cynicism to make sure that you're asking that you're taking a kind of realistic view and asking very tricky questions about whether it's really deliverable. I think
certainly something that we've done since this contract started is when we're in a contract with someone, if something appears to be going wrong for us, it's then making sure we talk to other boroughs who are using the same providers to get the intel. So certainly that's something that we're using with our social care system around report writing and pushing on that. So I think using that a lot more is helpful, and we've certainly built on that through some of the other contracts that we're in the process of letting, and some of the lessons with our financial system as well. So that's certainly something I think, starting from this, if we've done a bit more through the process, but certainly we're doing that with other contracts that we have now as well.
If we just look at the contract a bit more, it's great having a contract that allows you to do all these provisions. Break clauses are very blunt tools, hugely blunt tools, and as you say, they have a cost on the other side. Want something similar. What about mediation clauses and stuff like that? Did the contract provide for mediation?
Yes.
And that didn't work at all?
so I'm not sure how much of the detail of that I can really go into. It's a bit because there were elements of it that probably we would need to keep in a closed session. But I recall that was set out in the report to the Commission. There were mediation clauses and they were fully utilised.
But I'm struggling to remember, without detail, why did the mediation clauses not work? Without going into the detail, can you remind us why they didn't work?
I'm not sure if we can actually. It's a bit tricky, isn't it?
So just talking in abstract terms, the mediation clause went like this. You raise a dispute, you've got 28 days, or you can use an extended process within the contract. This was the contract. You can use an extended process to resolve the mediation. Both parties need to attend first of all, commercial discussions, and they need to be set up and both parties need to attend. And then you can refer the matter to a mediator, which both parties need to agree. And then beyond that, you go into commercial discussions around settlement. And that was the process within the contract that allowed you to go through an entire route.
I'm just thinking that probably by 10 minutes' time we'll move on to the green papers.
Go back to that,
Go
yeah.
back to mitigation when we're in closed session.
Okay. Broadly, was the mistake to see this as an IT project in the first place rather than a business processes project?
I think there was a bit of that actually. I think we kept telling ourselves we knew it was a change project, but actually, the technology can take over because it's such a massive enabler for what you're doing, and it becomes one of the key kind of most tangible elements of where you've got issues. So, you can't get a link line into the building and you have to wait 3 months for that to be provided, or actually you find out that there's an incompatibility and the integration between two systems needs to be redeveloped and you've all got to sit down and design it. So it can be a massive distraction and it can absorb a lot of attention, and therefore I think you can very easily get pulled back, even though you're telling yourself it's a change project, into focusing on the technological capability that makes the change possible, because that feels quite urgent and critical to the process. And I think we did put change resource into it, and we did do engagement with businesses. But as I said earlier, I just think no matter how much you do, you always need to do more, because there's that thing, isn't there? You have to tell people something 8 times before they hear you, and actually you've just got to keep saying it, and keep working through it. So I think there was a little bit of getting moved back into the technology because it always felt the thing that was going to hold us up the most.
And I suppose I would just draw attention to sort of section 2 of the report, which says what we did actually achieve. So it wasn't what we did actually achieve.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a complete failure.
No.
So I suppose just to remind people of that, with some of the language, sometimes it feels like that, but it wasn't. We actually got a new website. We did an awful lot around our processes, and some of the work that our residents are using, particularly sort of the integration around all the echo and veolia.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was not in place before, and there's a lot of manual adjustments and workaround. So there has been significant progress made in this area, but we know more needs to be done.
Natasha.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. Please keep being ambitious, and let us be the cynics. That's our job, is to be cynical and question everything and try and pick it all apart. Mine just kind of generally, where are we now? What are we doing now? And if we're talking about doing change through incremental changing and using the agile approach, are there then things we're going to be doing immediately to make things better? And then can we maybe think about, because we were talking about communication with internally, communicating with our residents about the incremental changes they may start to see, that as early as we possibly can may help us just make them understand what's actually going on. Because at the moment they're just kind of hit with this really clunky system that just, makes them want to tear their hair out.
So what we're doing at the moment is we're about to transition to, because all of the platform that we built the solution on is Microsoft, so it's all kind of standard software. But as an organisation, we're about to move to Office 365, which provides the kind of next level up of our Microsoft platforms, and so that will impact on the elements of Microsoft products that we're using within our customer contact solution. So that's planned, and we're about to go through. There's kind of some change freezes around that where we can't change anything because we've got our Microsoft partner looking at what they're going to do and locking stuff down and moving it around. But in between that, what we're doing is some small bits of incremental change. We've got 4 different providers working to us at the moment. 2 are external individual contractors who are specialists in using the systems that we're using to build the technology, and two are larger scale providers who kind of work with these solutions and do development. So it gives us a bit of a mix to use, which goes back to our kind of modular spreading the risk a little bit. And we've got them working on an agile board that we've got of different elements of functionality. Some of it is stuff that we wanted to deliver through the programme but fell away, and so we're going through that. And some of it is things that have arisen since that are urgent for the organisation that has emerged through our recent strategic planning exercise. So, for example, in the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've enabled people to report issues anonymously. That was a massive frustration for people, that they had to give their contact details to report a fly tip. And it was one of the things that came up repeatedly through the programme as not meeting our ambition. So we've just fixed that over the last few weeks. So now people can report that anonymously.
But tell people they can.
Yeah, so I think that's something maybe that we've not, and I guess it's part of just trying to quietly launch it and get those things going. Maybe we've missed the trick in kind of publicising that and telling people it's possible. So thank you for that, that's a good reminder. And our plan now is to keep doing that up until the point we're on the new platform. And in the meantime, we're developing a larger kind of website improvement project, because we always need to improve the website. It's not just a one-off project, it needs to go on. So we've got some funding set aside for that, and we've got a number of requests come through from all the services through that strategic planning exercise. So we've got some resources about to be put into the work of developing a project and a programme through that will go through our internal governance for approval.
So just to follow up then on the website development, and so then are we using our residents to do the user testing for that? Because I know that it said in the report that we had an expert in user experience and kind of that, but the way somebody uses a website as a resident is going to be very different to how anybody else does. So are we creating some kind of board where we can allow our residents to test the website and give feedback?
I think we need to look at that on a case-by-case basis. I think sometimes it's quite difficult to have real users involved in actual development. And so what we've usually done is use the feedback tool and social media to understand where there are issues. But I can see that actually that there's some kind of degree of concern about the initial response to that when it comes out and it's not quite right. But I think there will be situations where it might be quite difficult to have real users in actually testing things and then getting them changed and then retested and changed.
I understand that, but for things where we know people use regularly to reporting waste or reporting a park that needs to be tidied up, that kind of thing you can test, and waiting for the complaints to come in and then changing that seems a bit backwards when it's things that we know people will use on a daily basis.
Yeah. So we have kind of in our strategy we are saying we want to do that and have much more realistic testing of our processes. I think I don't have an exact answer of exactly how we'll make that work, but it certainly is something we've committed to in the strategy. And I think we just need to strike the right balance between not having people designed by committee, which would be really difficult and costly, versus making sure that the processes work for real people in real life circumstances. So I think we just need to figure out how we get that balance right. And it might be about setting up a user forum or something like that, but I think we're just kind of working that through.
Right.
Right. I think every one have almost what I wanted to say, but there's some two issues for my previous work. One is user acceptance testing. This is so crucial because it must be tested all the time. Each software should never be seen as software. because each software is always changing all the time, and we need to adapt the changes to to make our lives easier, make it more user friendly, and also your team must always keep looking for new ideas. We're very into new territory, but through my post experience, there's 3 different levels of testing. First thing is the process, and then it's the system testing, and then it's the user testing. And do you know understand why you need the local people to test, and you're sure we all cannot do that. And don't you say more about the testing stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So unit acceptance testing was one of the things that we held to very firmly in the contract, and I think one of the things where there was an attempt to dilute it slightly on the part of the provider, and we were quite resistant to that because we understood how important it was that it was thorough and correct. So not just the kind of first stage of user acceptance, but the kind of second UAT and all the kind of following subsequent stages, and making sure that we were fully testing it, not just testing the kind of remediation activity. I think I recall now that one of the things we looked at, and perhaps we should think about going forward to taking the previous comment, is that once the UAT is finished and you've accepted it, you can then start to perhaps bring other users in because you kind of know the functionality works. But our concern then is if they want fundamental changes, you've kind of already accepted the product with the provider. But by using perhaps more flexible resources, it might be that we have more flexibility once we know something works to tweak it on the basis of further testing beyond the final UAT. But I think we were very conscious that was a really key element for us in making sure that we were protecting the council's interests under the contract, because once you accept the product, that's it, you kind of sign the check, don't you? So I think there was a process around UAT that we tried to we enforced through the contract, and looking for new ideas. I think there's something that we're thinking about as an organisation at the moment, is about how we remain professionally curious. So how we're constantly bringing into our work our experience of our own lives with other councils and what we hear others are doing. I suppose it kind of there's a danger it kind of lands in the in-flight magazine territory where you kind of read something and you think that would be great. But I think we do recognise that it's important that we maintain that professional curiosity and think about how we use that. But also I think we want to improve the way our social listening, how we are listening both to the feedback what we get on the website, but also what people are saying on social media, and what we're gleaning from complaints and what we're gleaning from members' inquiries, which give us a clue about where things could be improved and where we could make the lives of residents better through the online functionality. So I think we want to improve in that. We're looking at how we structure our internal resources to make that possible.
Yes. Do you have a backup say, because about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the Merton was shut down for the entire weekend, and people did not weren't able to log in, etc. do you have a backup website in place? And why wasn't this up at the time?
Yes, so we do have disaster recovery and backup arrangements, and I think we did, that was about the national power strike, wasn't it?
National Power.
So it was the national power cut that resulted in that. I think what our frustration was that we have arrangements with our hosting company who should have monitor that and alert us to those and then put into place those backup arrangements, and they didn't on that occasion. So our systems failed. Our system, the arrangements we had in place failed, which is not good enough. So we've entered into a discussion with those about why that took place and how we prevent it in future. But I think it was a great disappointment for us as an organisation, because we had made arrangements for backup arrangements, and yet they failed, and the provider didn't deliver what we were expecting to. It's a different provider, our hosting provider. So we've gone into discussion about why that happened. But we do have disaster recovery and backup arrangements in place. So I think it was a bit unexpected for them that they got the power cut, the national power cut, and took them by surprise too.
Okay. And final question. As Elaine had went on talking about project managers and also hiring external staff, and it all can be very costly. I agree, but have training the internal staff, because if you have someone who has the experience, is passing it on, and whoever takes over cannot go with the website. No good,
Yeah.
Do you have training in place?
Yes, so we do. So it's interesting about project managers. I've managed another IT project where in the space of about 6 to 9 months we had 4 different project managers, because they were external experts, contractors that we brought in. But of course they have no, we can't keep them for 3 months when they're given their notice. They're contractors. We saw a marked improvement, didn't we, in the way the project was delivered, and it was delivered, and they saw it through to a conclusion. So I think we have to reflect on where you need someone who has done something specifically before, and no amount of training will give them the experience they need, and so you need some external support, but also how you think about the point at which you can actually start to use internal capacity with some support and some training to make sure that you get the longevity and the continuity that you need to see the project through to conclusion. And so we've done a bit of both, and we have also now recruited some resource for the council to use on a number of different projects, so that we are starting to grow and build our own capacity in that, albeit they will not be able to do some of the projects where there is a specific experience that we need to use. So we are trying to do some of that.
Thank you.
I suppose I was just going to add, we're doing everything we can. So it's either it's internal, it's external, it's interim, it's fixed term, it's permanent. We're trying everything to make sure we can get those skills, but they're in very short supply, particularly to get the experienced IT professionals who know the systems that we're working with. So a variety of solutions we are exploring to make sure that we're not cutting our noses off to spite our faces looking at the money side of things. It's what do we need to get done, and what is the best way of doing that with the limited resources that we have now.
Thank you, Caroline. Let's pause our conversation on this subject now, and we'll move on to agenda item 6 and just look at the work programme, and then we'll return to cover mediation. Now, following our July meeting, Julia has been working on the work programme, and it's set out in front of you. The question I think we really want to ask ourselves is whether we wish to move the reserve items into our formal agenda, or whether we wish to proceed on the basis it is set out on page 13. Do people have any comments? My own thought is it would be nice to get the Merton Centre for Independent Living into our work programme if we can do so.
They have a new chief exec as well, so that'd be quite good.
What's the order of magnitude of funding of the two things? So the two reserve items, social care charging and nearby contracts. What's the rough order of magnitude scale of money we're talking? Put you on the spot now, isn't it?
So
It's rare you can't answer a question like that.
I apologise. We get a grant of at least 4.5 million, so I'd say it was 6 or 7 million a year over a 25-year period. Social care charging, I suppose it depends on what you're looking at, but that will include home care as well as residential. I suppose until we hear anything from the government with the green paper. So, what do you think?
But that's more complex discussion.
It's probably around 8 million, if you then also include contributions.
£8 million, so they both roughly the same order of magnitude.
Is merit or demerit in discussing the social care if we haven't got a government green paper? Does that affect the timing of what needs to be discussed? Sure.
I'm not sure that in the absence of it, it is probably more crucial to see how we are doing with our charging. Because we're hoping that will then alleviate us from having to charge. And because people should be paying in the first place is what makes something to expect from the green paper. So it is your call.
Yes, I remember cutting my teeth on PFI, and there was a phrase that we'll use, it's the only game in town. So in other words, if you wanted money to expand your, as it was, our secondary schools, that's the only way you could do it. And despite having quite a lot of reservations about it, that's what we did, and we're working through it. You know, money comes in by way of grant, we pay it out. I'm not sure there's an opportunity for us to change very much there, actually, if anything at all.
Can I just say that came up through the topic workshop for the Children and Young Person panel,
Right.
and the director said that the issue wasn't so much reviewing what had happened, but looking at how to get properties returned to the council in a good state of repair. That was what was concerning her.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's quite a long way off.
2031.
Well, it's probably not urgent. Probably not urgent for this year.
After the climate change emergency, we'd have solved that.
Suggest social care
We can push that a little bit into the long grass and that if it's a 2031 issue. I want to be cynic by that.
You should.
So may I suggest then that we perhaps have the social care charging as part of our November agenda? Does that work?
Cause any difficulties with the organisations?
Or do you want to consider
Yeah.
that? Because
Also
if
because-
it's not November, then perhaps it can be February.
Yes, I'll certainly, but I suppose I'll also say because I'm not quite sure who's going to be writing that paper, because that may be Hannah and her officers, so we need to touch base with Hannah as well.
I'll just throw a complete curveball into this as well. Would it be possible, because a lot of what we do is funded on a treasury account, would it be possible to have an explainer session at some point in the programme that people took down, so you can talk it, so you or one of your team can talk us through it, because it's, I remember the election, but I just don't remember it any depth with regards to, I suppose with regards to what we borrow, with regards to how we use. So what borrowing from central government we're able to take, what we do take, what we invest in, how we use reserves, cash flows with reserves. So the big, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The big chunks of change, not the sort of, because in here we, quite rightly, we look a lot at expenditure, don't we? We look, to be honest, we look at year-end expenditure patterns. But underlying it all is the rules of the game, and what you're allowed to borrow, what you're allowed to invest in, what you're allowed, what rates you're allowed to do it, where you're allowed to invest in, how you're allowed to use your reserves, what you're mandated to keep as a reserves, whether or not you're allowed to use pensions, for instance, like some have, what some corporations do, match funding, all that kind of, those big ticket, as far as macro as we get as a council, I suppose. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because I think we always see the expenditure stuff, but I'm always convinced, that there's stuff that we don't understand that underpins it.
Well, before the July meeting, there was a kind of questions and answers session, wasn't there? So we could possibly have a...
One person turned up.
I was standing outside.
If people want to have a better understanding of treasury matters, maybe we could have the question and answer session before the November meeting, and have the Cllr social care charging discussion at the February meeting.
I don't mind. I'm just throwing it in there, and we can.
Yeah.
With it, I'm sure Julia.
I suppose the first question is.
I'm sure Julia will come up with a plan in concert with Caroline, and we'll.
Yeah. But I mean, would other people find that? Would colleagues find that useful?
Or is it just me interested?
It's always useful.
Yeah, it's cool.
I'll stand for 5 minutes and forget it.
Would it be different from the session that we have with members for the budget?
Yeah, because I think this is a much, I would say, lower level.
Okay.
So what I do for scrutiny is very high level. Sort of, we have interest. So you'll see in the monetary report, we have interest earnings, we have debt charges, and sort of move on. So similar to your mortgage, whereas I think you want sort of, here's the amount that we're investing, here's our rules, here's our strategy. So that's probably quite timely in November, and we can also have it wider than just the members of this group as well.
Okay.
So it's our macro. It's the economics that underpins our expenditure.
So we'll invite all colleagues, councillor colleagues, to this in November.
Thank you.
A particular aspect of that I would like to understand better is how we consistently outperform our budget on Treasury. That's that's commendable, but
I think it's a few years we haven't, but
We
thank
didn't.
you. But,
When interest rates plummeted, we didn't.
Yeah. So yeah,
okay.
and I think you said yesterday we're getting 1 point.
We're averaging 1.16% on our treasury management. Our deposits, that's our cash, our working capital, not our pensions investments. This is just the cash we have flowing through our books. We average 1.1%. It's not very good. Not very
No, I wanted to say that, but yeah.
Remember the key criteria there is the liquidity,
No, but
the
that's
security.
so that's
And
the
the security
that
of the
everybody
money.
to talk is that you're saying, can we use that? Because lots of people say, why aren't we using our reserves to say invest in the local economy with regards to this? And the answer is because of liquidity and access. Yeah. Why aren't we investing in that area? There's it's that stuff. You know what I mean? How you balance liquidity versus security versus local investments versus what you can borrow from government. Whether or not there's a policy and a strategy we have as a council to not borrow, to intervene in the local market because we're against the PSBR, all that kind of stuff. Is to understand that, I think, it'd be useful. I know.
Fifteen
I'm getting a bit
minutes.
discussed on this in the June. What?
We did discuss some of this in the June session.
Okay, do you want to rub it in again that I couldn't make the June session?
For the
Okay.
one person who turned up.
Yeah. Paul, okay. Oh, it's fine then, cancel this. I'll get Paul to tell. It's fine then. I'll get Paul to give this out. I didn't know you're an expert on it.
I think we know what we're doing. Let us move on. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you.